They're trying to change kids' mindsets, the way they think about things. No, 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 no. Change the experience. Show kids they can succeed in academic situations, then they will believe it. Then you'll change that mindset.
Welcome to Toddle School Leaders Project. I'm your host, Cindy Blackburn, and today I'm talking to the one, the only, Tom Guskey. One thing that I've noticed is that in the US, there's lots of terms for assessment. I've heard mastery-based grading, standards-based grading, competency-based grading, all kind of used interchangeably. So I thought, let me talk to the master himself and get to the bottom of what assessment and grading should look like in progressive schools. Let's jump right in. Tom Guskey, I'm so excited to have you here with me on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Cindy, it's wonderful to be with you again. Thank you for inviting me.
Tom, I've come to the US world of education and I feel like there's so many names for what we're doing. I hear CBE assessment, mastery-based assessment, standards-based assessment, lots of different terms. And when I read about like the theory and the practice, they all feel really similar to me. So am I missing the boat? Is there a difference between competency-based assessment and these other methodologies?
Right. Well, we do have this strange habit in education that when something's not working very well, we never change it substantively. We just change the name.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the history of education over the last 30 years or so, we've had these different sort of words that we use. So we're deeply involved with competency-based education back in the 1970s. In 1980s, we turned to outcome-based education. That kind of got passe, and we moved to sort of the standards approach. Then we're moving to sort of mastery approach. Now we're sort of there's a rebirth of the competency notions. I take this back though to looking about the people that were really instrumental in developing the basic ideas behind any of these approaches. And so to me, that really takes us back to the work of Ralph Tyler. In 1949, Ralph Tyler, at that time working at the University of Chicago, wrote a little tiny book that he called Basic Principles of Curriculum Instruction. And in this book, Tyler stresses that before you can teach anyone anything, there are two fundamental decisions you have to make. Number one, you must decide what it is you want students to learn and be able to do. And number two, you must decide what evidence you would accept to verify they learned it. That's pretty much it. I mean, decide what you want them to learn and be able to do, and decide what evidence you would accept to verify they learned it. And Tyler also stressed that what you label those things doesn't matter.
Right.
It really doesn't. So you can call them outcomes or competencies or proficiencies or performances or expectations or aspirations. You can call them New Year's resolutions for all I care. It's just the clarity that matters. And Tyler stressed that once we make that clear, that when you define what you want them to learn and what you want them to be able to do, that means that there must be a combination of sort of knowledge and process.
Right.
So the idea of separating, having knowledge standards and process standards is really kind of crazy. And this was the basis then of Ralph Tyler's probably most prominent student, just happened to be Benjamin Bloom.
And who's Benjamin Bloom's most prominent student?
That's right. Benjamin Bloom was my advisor and the chair of my doctoral committee. So Bloom comes along, and we worked under Tyler. Tyler was the chair of Bloom's doctoral dissertation. Bloom graduated from the University of Chicago in 1942, and he recognized that. So Tyler says this idea that we have to be able to blend sort of content and process together. So Bloom then had a job as what was called the university examiner. What happened was after the Second World War and the passage of the GI Bill, colleges and universities in the United States were growing very rapidly. I mean, all these men and women were coming back from the Second World War, and with the help of the GI Bill, they were going on to universities. And so they found that there was this tremendous growth in universities throughout the United States. One of the problems they had is that they would have multiple sections of the same course. So like freshman English 101, they'd maybe have 20 sections of it. And how were they going to guarantee that there was any comparability in each of those sections because they were taught by different people? Well, what universities did is they developed this, what they called an office of the university examiner. And this office would then coordinate the development and administration of one course final exam for the course.
Hmm.
So it didn't matter who taught the course. All the students who took freshman year English 101 would take the same final exam. And these offices of university examiners would sit down with the faculty and they would help them develop their exams. And so almost all of our major universities had a university examiner. Benjamin Bloom was the university examiner at the University of Chicago.
Cool.
And he found as they were developing these exams that there was tremendous variation in the quality and the cognitive complexity of what they were asking students to compete. So
Mm.
Bloom gave the example in one place where they were working. They developed a course exam for entry-level biology, and the faculty in the biology department wanted to have 600 questions on the exam.
Oh.
The philosophy department had a similar comparable exam in which they had 2 questions. So, so they had to bring some way of organizing this. So Bloom forms this organization of university examiners. They
Mm.
began meeting at the American Psychological Association meeting. They started meeting in 1948. And they developed, they wanted to find a way that they could look at items and learning goals in terms of what they did for students, what kind of
Okay.
thinking they required. And so they developed what they called this taxonomy of educational objectives. And this looked at these different levels. And so the first level was knowledge, knowing. Second level
All
was
those biology
comprehension.
questions.
Yes, comprehension. Uh, then you had application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. They developed the initial version of it in 1954, and nobody thought it was very important.
Mm.
Uh, Finally, in 1956, they got this little tiny publishing house in New York uh, called Riverside Publishers, and they published 5,000 copies of this taxonomy of educational objectives. Well, between 1956 and 1966, it did not sell those 5,000 copies.
Whoa.
No, no, no. Nobody thought it was very important. From 1966 to 1976, it sold over 1 million copies. It became the basis of all this curriculum development work done throughout the world. And basically, what they showed in this taxonomy is that content and process had to work together. That just to know it was just give it back to me the same way I give it to you. To comprehend it was to be able to explain it in your own words and give
Mm.
different examples of it. Application meant transfer to new and different contexts. Then there was analysis, with compare and contrast, identify similarities and differences.
Mm.
Synthesis, combine things in new and unique ways. Evaluation. Evaluation talked about thinking about the implications of these ideas, the moral dimension of it, the consequences, just like video. But this became then the basis of all this curriculum to work throughout the world. Uh, but it was Bloom's orientation toward how do we appropriately assess student learning that led to the development of that taxonomy that then got into the work of these university examiners throughout the world.
Today's episode is brought to you by Toddle, your all-in-one teaching and learning platform for K through 12 schools. If you're at the stage where you're ready to really document your curriculum, to measure what matters and assess and have open communications about what students are learning, Toddle is the perfect fit for you. Check us out at toddleapp.com. And now let's get back to the episode. How cool. I love how you stay grounded in history. And because I think so much you're part of it. Like you've been part of this chain of great thinkers who are keeping this thread alive of like what is worth assessing in school culture. So how cool to get that story.
Yeah. What's amazing, though, I mean, these things happened before any of us were born.
Right.
And yet, what oftentimes in their new work, we neglect that history. I mean, these were brilliant people that really
Right.
thought about this well.
Oh, I love that, Tom. So, might we kind of get on the same clarifying page? So, we've talked a little bit about how it can go by many names:
Mhm,
competency, mastery, standards, outcomes.
mhm.
But what would you say are the hallmarks of this type of assessment?
Well, I think that it doesn't have so much to do with the way the assessments are structured. It has to do a lot with how the results are used. What Bloom wrote about and made so clear in this work is that all that depends on the instruction. And so that if I have a question that, as I look at it, it seems to me this question is asking students to make an application in a new and different context. And so I
Okay.
might consider this an application question, which kind of makes sense. But then if you go back to the class and you found that the teacher taught that application in a very direct way,
Then
then
it's
for those
generalization.
students, that question is not an application question, it's a recall question. It's a knowledge question. All they have to do is remember what the teacher said in class. To other students who are taught in different ways, though, that could be an application question or a transfer question.
Mm.
And so the idea that you can look at questions and actually categorize them according to the taxonomy based upon the verb they use in structuring the question is really kind of crazy. It
Mm.
really is instructionally related. But this is where Bloom's, I think, real brilliance came in, because in 1968, he was the one who first talked about using assessments for the purpose of learning rather than just as evaluation tools.
Mm.
It was Bloom in 1968 who actually brought the word formative assessment to education.
Oh, cool.
And he really advocated this notion of using assessments for the purpose of, number one, identifying what students have learned well. Number two, identifying what they haven't learned well. All right. And then number three, pairing that with guidance and direction to students as to how they can improve. And it was from that that we really changed the notion of assessments being just evaluation devices to actually being an integral part of the instructional process. And it was
Gorgeous.
Bloom who then brought the idea of formative assessments to it. So it wasn't necessarily that you can't look at an assessment and say, well, this is summative, this is formative.
Right.
It's how you use the results. And so it was that Bloom brought to this whole area of assessment that really changed the entire field.
So, so might I say back the hallmarks that I heard there, and then can you either correct me if I'm wrong and add on if I've missed anything?
Okay?
Okay, so the first piece that I heard was that competency-based mastery assessment begins with clear success criteria, which has to outline both the knowledge and the process, that they can't be separated. What students will know, understand, and be able to do as a result of the learning needs to be clear for everyone.
Mhm.
Hallmark one.
Got it?
The second would be a transition towards majority formative assessment. And what we mean by that is that as teachers, we're using the assessment to inform teaching and learning and to feed forward the learning process towards mastery.
Mhm.
Would you say that those are the kind of the biggest hallmarks of competency assessment, or is there something I'm missing?
Well, there is a little bit that I would add to that because, and it's not like majority or minority, it is the difference in use. But what has happened since 1968 and Benjamin Bloom developed these ideas, that, that the idea of a formative assessment has been really, in some ways, perverted. Bloom
Mm,
had the idea that a formative assessment would occur at the end of what he called a learning unit. And a learning unit was where natural breaks occurred in the instructional process where the teacher would want to go back and check to see if students were with him or not.
okay.
He distinguished formative assessment from what he called checking for understanding.
It's a
And
difference.
checking for understanding were the things that teachers did on an ongoing basis as part of the teaching.
So
You
any
know,
learning engagement
yeah,
is a
raise your hands, have any questions, fill out a whiteboard, all those sort of things. Turn and talk. And he said that we do as a part of the instructional process. But after maybe about a week at the elementary level, up to maybe 2 weeks at the secondary level, you want to check and really get a good sense of where students are in terms of that learning unit, where natural breaks occur. He thought
Mhm.
that learning units would be shorter at the elementary level, maybe a little bit longer at the secondary level. But even at the university level, I never liked to go more than about 2 weeks to really check to find out if everybody's with me. And so a formative assessment was much like a quiz.
Okay.
You didn't want it to be a whole period assessment, but something that you could have students go through, ask a series of questions, and then provide them with feedback on their. But Bloom stressed that just just letting students know how they did on the assessment was not going to improve.
Right.
he really emphasized that the feedback had to be paired with what he called correctives. But he stressed the most important things about the correctives is that it's not reteaching.
Okay.
Where people mistake in two ways. All right, they mistake this idea of any time you ask students to respond to a question, that's formative. That's a formative assessment. So I asked the kids a question in class, that's formative assessment. Well, no, no, no,
Check.
no.
Done.
He
Okay.
said that's checking for understanding, which is a good thing to do. Right. The formative assessments he defined as more formal, sort of stop, take stock where we
Intentional.
are, and do that. Um, but he also stressed that just letting them know how they did in the assessments isn't going to help them improve. That we had to pair with that these correctives, but the correctives had to be qualitatively different from the original instruction. That just going back and repeating a process we already know hasn't worked for these kids isn't going to lead to any better results the second time around. What's essential is that we recognize these kids learn differently. So as teachers, we tend to teach as we learn best. It's only natural that we do and we should. But not all of our students learn best in those same ways. And so the correctives have to involve a different presentation and a different kind of engagement for students so that it taps into a way of learning that was different from the original instruction. Now, Bloom recognized that that's really tough to do if you're working by yourself in isolation.
Right.
But the best resource for correctives are teaching colleagues,
Yeah. Having
structured
huge
opportunities.
interaction.
Yeah, for teachers to plan collaboratively. That if you and I have a chance to plan together, it's likely your best approach to teaching something is different from mine.
Cool.
And so your approach could be a great corrective for me, and maybe my approach could be a great corrective for you. Uh, but he stressed that the teachers have to structure that corrective opportunity. That just saying, go over your test, redo some things, and come back and let me know when you want to take it again. No, the correctives are done in class under the teacher's direction. So that the teacher takes the students through this process to show them they can succeed. And when they see the process works for them, then they're likely to take it on their own. Then they're going to do it on their own because they see the benefits of that. But Bloom stressed we have to provide students with that guidance direction initially to get them into the process.
Smart. So kind of really scaffold those initial mastery experiences so they build a stronger sense of efficacy.
Exactly. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Woof. Okay, this is a lot. So let's get into some of the kind of more practical side of things then. So we've said that the first step really is deciding what we're assessing, which to
Mhm.
me feels so crystal clear, right? We can't start a learning journey and not know where we're headed. So,
Right.
as an educator, how do we best determine what to assess, and how do we like organize those best?
There's no limit to what you can learn in any academic discipline or subject area, but a curriculum is finite. And when we define a curriculum, we specify within that entire domain the things we believe are most important for students to learn. Nobody would ever put something in a curriculum you expect some students not to be able to learn. This doesn't make sense. And so once you identify the curriculum, then our job as teachers becomes instruction. What can we do to have all of our students learn that curriculum excellently? Not just some, but all. So that now Tyler, and this book is so brilliantly written because Tyler emphasizes that when you pick out from that domain the most important things to learn, you have to realize those are value decisions. I mean, we are
Okay.
specifying what we think are most important. And so I wrote a blog for Education Week about this, where you have to decide, do you want students to, sort of know the rules and accept the rules and go along with those rules and learn how to follow the rules? Or do you want them to question the rules? Do you want them to ask if these are the right rules or the better rules we could follow? Right?
Mm,
Because it takes you in very different directions with regard to the kind of curriculum that you would structure and the instructional practices you would use.
right.
So Tyler stressed that those curriculum decisions are definitely value decisions. What we most value as society and what we want our society to become. But
Right.
once we do identify that, then it's clear our job is to have all of our students learn that well.
Interesting. So you're saying I might have a set of curriculum standards, maybe next gen science standards, for example.
Mhm.
I still need to filter that through the lens of my school's mission. And I
Right?
still need to organize those into learning goals that are more accessible for my learners
Right.
and for myself. That I can't, it's not going to be practical that I'm just going to take a set of standards and use them directly in my classroom. There's a process of processing that needs to happen.
Right. Right. Well, and again, we look for that guidance for it, um, because and the reason we develop a curriculum is to make some decisions beyond the focus of an individual teacher about what students should really have, what they should learn, what they should be able to do for this. So, for example, um, I had, when I was in high school, an American history teacher who was a Civil War addict. This
Okay.
man loved the Civil War. And so in American history, we covered all of American history from like 1490 up to 1850 in like the first 2 weeks. All right. Because
Get
that
it
was
out of
preliminary information anyway. And then to go from 1850 to 1870, all right, took us the next 20 weeks of the school year. All right. It was a joke. All right. It wasn't an American history class, it was a Civil War class. It wasn't very
there.
good close to that. And we as students, we would knew how to get along with this. And so we would take turns. We'd say, Joe, it's your turn today. Before class starts, we want you to ask a question about the Civil War. And so we'd come into class, and before class starts, Joe would raise his hand and say, "Oh, Mr. Claycomb, the other night I was reading," which if you knew Joe, knew this was a lie to begin with, all right? And he asked this question about some trivial aspect of the Civil War. And the man would stand up there and say, Joseph, that's a really interesting point. Let me tell you about that. And would go on the whole class waxing eloquently about this trivial aspect of Civil War, and we had a free class.
Oh my gosh.
It was a joke, all right? Now, if a curriculum had been specified about what an American history teacher needs to have students learn and be able to do as a result of that class, then I think that could have been avoided. But what I want teachers to understand is any curriculum is a skeleton at best. And if that's all you provide for your students, then it's clearly not enough. And
Mm,
the teacher's task is in building the skeleton around or building the body around the skeleton. So if all of us was reduced to our skeleton, we'd look a lot alike. It'd be
right.
hard to tell one from the other. But how different we look. I mean, how wonderful that is, how beautiful that is. And see, that's the beauty of what a teacher brings to teaching. You fashion a body around the skeleton. And so the body that I fashion as a teacher could be different from the body you fashion as a teacher. And that's okay, even though the skeleton is similar. And so we don't want students leaving the classroom without an arm or a leg. All right, they have to have the skeleton. But a
Well,
skeleton by itself is dead. I mean, you have to have a body around the skeleton. So I don't want teachers to see a curriculum as limiting in any way. It's a framework around which you build those things that you consider most important. You want students to learn the love that you bring to the subject. All that is what you build in as a teacher, framing that body around the skeleton.
love that metaphor. I've never heard that one, and I'm definitely going to use it in the future.
Oh, good.
So I guess the question there is, do you think that teachers should be part of building the skeleton, or do you think as leaders we should be giving them the skeleton so that they have more time to create the body?
Well, I think there's certainly a compromise there. I mean, one of the things we've learned in recent years, and when we left textbooks, we've gone away from textbooks and said teachers need to be free from the textbook. They need to be
Creating.
with
Yeah.
structure. Yes, but it created this tremendous burden on teachers to write their own textbook. Now they had to find all these resources, develop all these things, so it made lesson planning really difficult. I remember when I first started teaching. This was some years ago. Um, so I get my first job, and what the principal hands me the teacher's edition of the textbook for all my classes and a student edition. So I had this as the framework for my one of my classes were, and it didn't necessarily limit me, but it did give me a framework upon which I had to build. I knew what the expectations were.
Right.
Now, what we've gotten to the point now in our field where in every academic discipline, there's a professional organization of teachers. And the professional organization of teachers has developed standards for learning in that particular subject area. And they're great. And I think that what conscientious people are doing in leadership positions at the state level is they are looking to those professional organizations of teachers and then making sure that there's alignment between what the teachers and academic discipline people think are important and what the state or district feels is important.
Mm.
And if those two don't match up, if they're not aligned, then we need to make some decisions because it's real clear that we need to have those aligned. We can't be disagreeing about what sort of things students should have, what should be the basis of it. Now, teachers should certainly feel free to add to it and enhance it and build on it. But when it comes to identifying that skeleton, then we need to have some consistencies there. So I think that in states that are thoughtful about this process, they are looking to make sure that the state learning goals or standards or competencies are well aligned with what the people that are subject area experts are doing this.
I think that makes a lot of sense. But
Mhm,
what I'm hearing is that there are so many great resources out there. And as a school leader, I think that is part of our role is to say we're the champions of our school's mission.
mhm,
Part of our job is to identify what the skeleton of that looks like, and then to provide teachers with the training to build the body around it versus spending all of our time creating sets of standards or creating the skeletons with teachers. We know they've got limited time.
mhm.
So give them that and then lift them up to do the real pedagogical work.
Right. Well, see, I think that's what we're at a stage today where we're recognizing that one of the greatest benefits that we can provide teachers in any teaching situation is to provide them with high quality instructional materials.
Hmm.
And so, what I see happening is there's a resurgence of interest in textbooks.
Right.
And the
Because they're
textbook
not
companies,
inherently bad.
no, that's right. And what the textbook companies are doing thoughtfully, I mean, they're doing it because of a profit motive,
Right.
is they're lining the textbook with these standards and competencies as they're outlined by the professional organization of teachers. So if I have a math series that is aligned very directly with the learning goals and standards of the National Council of Teachers Mathematics, wow, wow.
Great.
I mean, it's going to sell like crazy because everybody is in line with that. And so, what prompts me as a publisher, a commercial publisher, uh, with a profit motive is how can I make this aligned with the things that I know
People
teachers are
care
being
about it.
compelled to use? Yeah, exactly. And so, you got it.
Well, that's it. Because then that might even be it's the set of standards, yes. And also, we know that teachers are clamoring for inquiry based or project based or
Yeah,
play based learning. And let's create a textbook that isn't just worksheets and rote, it actually builds in those practices. I think what I like to see, though, is that schools see the textbook as a resource, though, and not the curriculum. I think there has to be that distinction.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that too, what this is helping us is that it's bringing focus to what we're trying to accomplish.
Smart. The second piece of all this, Tom, that we've not really talked about is mastery.
Mhm,
And I wonder if you might explain what mastery looks like in practice, or how do we know that a student has achieved mastery?
mhm. Well, again, I always say that when I write these things, it's really like the quote that I see so far today because I stand on the shoulders of giants.
Mhm.
It's truly the case. So when Benjamin Bloom was developing mastery learning, he knew that no matter what he labeled mastery to be, people were going to argue with him about it.
Right.
Um, but Bloom was really clever, and what he did was he just went back to teachers and he said, "Okay, do you give grades?" And she said, "Well, of course we give grades." He said, "Okay, are the grades really based on student learning? I mean, versus being based on students' relative standing among classmates. I mean, don't tell me you give like A's to the top 20%. Are they really based on what the students have learned and are able to do?" She said, "Yes, they're based on student learning." Bloom said, "Great. Tell me what you expect for an A." I don't have to tell you what mastery is. You have already decided. Just tell
Hmm.
me what you expect for the A. Make that clear. And once we make that clear, then our job becomes having all students reach that level. Right now, and this is so important because it is a little bit different, and it's a revision we have made in our approach to development of rubrics with regard to standards.
Mm.
When when the the standards movement was first begun in the early 2000s. We started to develop rubrics to go along with the standards. And the rubrics identified the criteria by which performance is going to be judged, and then we had graduated levels of quality within each of those criteria. I really like the work of Susan Brookhart in this area for the development of rubrics. But our traditional approach was this. We started with a level of proficiency that was typical level 3. We had a couple of levels leading up to it, and we always had a level above. The level above was the exemplary or the distinguished level.
Yeah.
And that worked pretty well in the elementary grades because the level above was always easy to establish. If I'm working on third grade standards, it's fourth grade stuff, right? Problems occurred when we tried to transition that to middle school and high school. Because in middle school and high school, the question of students and of their parents isn't what do I have to do to be proficient? It is what do I have to do to get an A? Mm-hmm. And that whole approach, standards or competency-based, just killed them. And we found so many programs falling apart because of that. And so the new approach that we're now taking to the development of rubrics is start at the top.
Yeah.
Go back to start where Benjamin Bloom said, right? If to get that top level, it means working on fourth grade stuff in third grade, that's okay. We just have to be clear about it. Because what we found is that parents do not question us about rigor. Parents question us about clarity. And where we fail is when we are unclear. And I know this runs counter. It runs counter first to a lot of consultants in the area of grading who say you should have a top category that is the wow experience, the blow my socks off experience, the teach me something I don't know experience, right? Doesn't work. Because every parent wants their child to strive for the highest grade possible.
Right.
And that means the teacher has to say, this is what it looks like. This is how I will know it. Here's an example of what that looks like. You can't just say you have to exceed the expectations because it's out there somewhere.
And it's not the expectation.
That's right. It's out there. We think we're going to know when we see it. We just can't tell you what it is ahead of time. No, that doesn't satisfy them. It's the clarity that matters. No parent has ever said, you're expecting too much from my kid. What they do say is, be clear with me and with them about what you're expecting. And so it's the clarity that matters. Now, this also runs counters to my good friend Bob Marzano has a different approach to this. Bob's idea is that you should have your level of proficiency, and then you should have a level above that's a bit more cognitively complex. And so if my standard dealt with maybe application or transfer, I should have a little above that deals with like analysis or synthesis. And I say that's great. I mean, I can go along with that, but you've changed the standard.
That's it.
The example I use, and I have illustration of this, is like Olympic archery. If you've ever seen the archery in the Olympics, archers stand 70 meters from a target, and they have to hit a target that's just 12 centimeters in diameter. That's really hard. I mean, if you ever stood 70 meters from a target, that's really hard. Now, if you did that, how could you exceed that? How could you do better than that? And Bob might say, well, we could move the archer back to 80 meters. Or we could make the target 6 centimeters instead of 12 centimeters. And I say, I'm fine with that. But you've changed the standard.
Then it's a different Olympic sport.
That's right. And I'm fine with changing the standard, be clear about it.
Cool.
When a kid comes home with a paper and shows the parent the grade, no matter what you label it, the parent's always question is, wow, is that the best you can get?
Always. And are you the best? Where do you rank? Where do you fall?
Every parent's question is that the best you can get? Because if it's not, I want you to strive to get the best you can get. And so that's why we have to be clear about it. We're going back to what Bloom told us in the 1970s, start with the top, no matter what that is. If it means working on a more advanced level, if it means exceeding the expectations, that's fine. Be clear about it. Start at the top level and then go down from there.
So is that kind of the simplest shift people can make today? It's just your rubric stops at mastery and there's nothing above it.
Well, it's true, but I mean, it's whatever you consider mastery to be. I mean, Bloom was the idea that teachers have established mastery when they give grades, but it's the highest grade you give. It's the A, right?
Cool.
And he was convinced that with high quality instruction, sufficient time, that 90% or more of the students could get A's in a class.
Hmm.
And because that would say that they were mastering the curriculum. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to make all students the same. It means that some students are going to learn only the curriculum and are going to learn it really well. Others are going to learn the curriculum and a lot more. But our grades are based on the curriculum.
Right.
So there you go. Now, there are other ways you can note going beyond the curriculum. And you can do that through narrative descriptions. You can do that through other kinds of opportunities in describing what students have accomplished. But in terms of a grade, the grade should reflect the expectations with regard to the curriculum.
Smart.
And so,
And not behavior and not effort and not how kind they are, but just their ability to demonstrate proficiency of the agreed upon standard.
in other words, don't grade on the curve.
Right.
Uh, that number one, you don't know anything about anybody's learning if that's what you do. Everybody could have miserably, it's just some did less miserably than others. Uh, it makes learning really competitive. Kids have to compete against each other for a few scarce high grades. Uh, Diminishes the relationship of teachers to students because if a teacher starts helping one student, you're not helping the others. It becomes very,
Competition.
you're interfering in the competition. But if you grade according to criteria, all those things change. So
And
now,
we can all help each other. We're all partners
that's right.
versus
You're
competitors.
competing against a curriculum, not
Right.
against each other. All right.
Well,
The grade has meaning and it puts teachers and students on the same side. So, but then it becomes a little bit more complicated because we found that there were three different types of criteria that teachers use. The first is what I labeled product criteria.
hmm.
And product criteria are common demonstrations of learning. Don't worry about how they got there. Worry about what they're able to do at the end.
The 5 paragraph essay.
Yes. Second, we have what are called process criteria. And process criteria don't represent learning per se, but they facilitate the learning process.
Hmm.
So, for example, homework. If you count
Okay.
homework in a grade, you're grading according to process. Class participation, the effort they put forth. All right, those are all process criteria. And third, we have progress. And progress, you don't worry about where they are, but how far they've come.
Cool.
Sometimes referred to as improvement grading or value added grading, gain grading. A student could make great progress, but still be achieving below grade level. Another student could come in knowing everything they need to know, make no progress at all, but get a high achievement grade. Now, what we know is that, and they used to become known as like the three P's of grading. And to be honest, I chose those labels only because I'm kind of fond of alliteration and
The
product
truth is
as
out.
progress. Yeah, it kind of worked out. Uh, but all three are important, but all three are distinct. What gets
Right.
us into trouble is when we combine them in a
Yeah.
single grade because the
What's
grade
what?
becomes meaningless. Yeah. The highly responsible low achiever gets the same C grade as the irresponsible high achiever. It miscommunicates about both. And so the critical element that we identified in 1994 got to do separate grades. You have to separate those. And again, this is counter. Some people are saying, yeah, we need to pull out those non-achievement things. But the thing is, you just can't pull them out
No, because
because,
they are important to the
yeah,
culture of your
I want
classroom
to
and who
go
these
to
people
these
are
people and
becoming.
shake them and said, have you been in a school? Have you
Yeah.
talked to a 14-year-old? I mean, as soon as you say homework doesn't count, I'm not doing that anymore. So the idea is you count it, but you give it a
Separate.
separate grade. Now, what's ironic is that looked in some of these school districts in Canada. Canadians have been doing this for decades.
Oh, Canada.
Yeah, they're so far ahead. They're so less bound by tradition. And so you look at a Canadian report card. They have an achievement grade, and they can use that for GPA and all the kind of stuff we do. But over here on the side, a separate grade for homework, a
Cool.
separate grade for class participation, a separate grade for punctuality and turning in assignments. Now, when I saw their system, I said, well, it looks great. Looks like so much extra work. They turned back to me and said, it's easier than what you silly people do in the States.
Because it's so emotional when you're trying to clump it all together. It's like, oh, you feel so guilty if your kid gets a B, but they've been trying so hard. Like
Yeah.
it
Well,
makes it an emotional thing versus just a simple piece of data.
yeah. And the idea is that we gather that information. The Canadians don't worry about how to weight or to combine it at the end. And so it's easier for them. It's no more extra work. The teachers love it because they find when a parent questions them about achievement grade, all they have to do is say, well, look over here. Maybe if your child started doing the homework, maybe if they started participating more in class, achievement grade would go up.
Smart.
Parents like it because it profile the performance of their kids in school. The college and universities love it because all grades are included on the transcript.
Smart.
So if you go into the website for the Ontario Ministry of Education, you can see these non-cognitive things they pull out and report separately on the report card and on the transcript, kindergarten through 12th grade.
Woof. So
And
cool.
they've been doing it for 20 years. All right. So it's it's
Doable.
it's something
There's
that's
so many models around the world that show that this is doable, and that
oh yeah.
that assessment doesn't have to be a gotcha system. It can be a system that informs teaching and learning, and it can bring clarity and joy and connection.
Yeah.
And I really think we've somehow missed the mark here in bringing that into practice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bit frustrating because the idea of doing it has been around for a long time.
Right.
Um, but it's just that we keep having to I don't know, rediscover it in some way, I guess.
Tom, my last question for you. One piece of advice for a school leader who wanted to move towards a more competency-based assessment approach. What would that be?
Well, I'd say two things. All right. The first would be to be much more conscientious about asking for evidence. Uh,
Mm.
there, as a part of developing our book on grading with integrity, we looked at how many new books have been published on grading over the year. And I actually traced the development from 1970 until today, and by decade, for it. And so you look from like 1970 during the 1970s, there were two books published on grading. In the next decade, in 1980s, there were two books published. So 20 years, we had four books. Three of the four actually had to do with grading in post-secondary education. Uh, then you hit the 1990s, where there were 16 books published. Right.
Mm.
In the 2000s, there were 24 books published. In the 2010s, there were 56 books published. Right. 56 books. And from 2020 to 2024, there have already been 25 new books published.
Wow.
Everybody that has an opinion about it is writing a book. And so my advice to school leaders is to ask for evidence,
Smart.
to really be looking at what the evidence shows us in this area, uh, and to really pay attention to that, and to be looking for things that we have evidence to really support, because there's a lot of good evidence out there, and we
Right.
never just need to be more conscious of it.
So don't follow the shiny object. Follow the really tried and true and research
That's
back.
right. That's right. And the second thing would be to pay better attention to the change process.
Mm.
And here's what I mean. Um, I first began looking at this. In fact, my doctoral dissertation dealt with the whole process of teacher change. And everybody that writes about professional learning for educators agrees that there are three major areas of change we're trying to impact. We want some change in attitudes and beliefs. We want teachers to believe this will work. We want them to accept the idea of inclusion. We want to believe all kids can learn, all those kind of things. A second area of change, we want some change in teaching practices. We want to do things differently. And of course, the third is we want some change in student learning. We want improvement, right?
Mm.
Everybody that writes about professional learning agrees those are the three areas we're trying to impact. The question I raised was this: in what order did those changes occur?
Mm.
Don't all happen simultaneously. And if you're going to be effective as a leader, you need to think about that order, because you need to know where to put your time and energy. So I was able to trace the history of professional learning in the United States anyway, and found it was a long and distinguished history based on the idea that the order of change is attitudes and beliefs first, leading change in practice, resulting in change in student learning.
Right.
I could trace this back to the work of early change theorist Kurt Lewin. Wrote a lot about this in the 1940s, and he based a lot of his ideas on psychotherapeutic models. It's like the basis of Alcoholics Anonymous. All right, you got to recognize you got a problem, then you can get some change in your behaviors, then you get some results. Unfortunately, all of our research on teacher change shows that's not the way it happens.
Strategy, strategy, strategy.
No. The way it happens with most teachers is this: practice is first,
Yeah.
student learning second, attitudes and beliefs last. And the reason that is so, it is experience that shapes the attitudes and beliefs. It's not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this has a lot of really important implications for leaders. The first is this: if you're setting out to change the attitudes and beliefs of the people with whom you work, you're doomed. It's not going to work. I mean, I always say, if I can change people from being cynical to skeptical, I'm very happy. That's all I'm working on. All right. I don't expect anybody to believe they're convinced this is going to work. I'm not that foolish. All I hope is they're skeptical enough to say, I'm not so sure, but I'll give it a try.
Right.
If I can get to that, and by giving it a try, they see a change in the students, then and only then the attitudes and beliefs start to change. In
Mm,
fact, there's evidence actually now to show that there's a very direct relationship between the change in students and the change in teacher attitudes and beliefs.
cool.
Small change in student learning, small change in attitudes and beliefs. Huge change in student learning, drastic change in attitudes and beliefs. Now, so for a leader, what it says is you need to build in to any innovation a mechanism whereby teachers can gain feedback on the impact it's having for kids.
That they can see it.
They can see that
They
it's making a
unequivocally
difference.
see the
Yes,
impact you're having.
they
It's
will
like
believe
building
it when
mastery
they see it.
experiences,
Yes,
intentional mastery experiences.
build that in. That's what Bandura says. What's the key to
Like the
efficacy?
elective
Mastery
mastery
experiences.
experiences.
More
Yep.
powerful than anything else. Yes,
Number one.
build that in. The
You
same
and I
order
could
of
do that all
change,
day.
the same order of change holds for students.
Cool.
And this is where we're missing it. We have all these programs designed to help kids develop a growth mindset, a sense of efficacy and agency, grit, perseverance. All right. They're making modest results at best. All right. Because they're focusing on the wrong stuff. They're trying to change kids' mindsets, the way they think about things. They're trying to change their attitudes and beliefs. No. Change the experience.
Yes.
Show kids they can succeed in academic situations. Show them that they hold the keys to their success. Use mastery learning. Have it guided by the teacher. Show them that they can do these things and lead to that success. Then they will believe it. Then you'll change that mindset. Right? The same order of change holds for parents.
Mm,
All these schools that are going through now trying to put out all these fires of resistance against grading reform, right, have gone about it the wrong way, right? They're trying to change attitudes and beliefs up front. Here's what we did. We had an initiative here in the state of Kentucky where several school districts were struggling with grading reform, and they asked us if we could help here at the university. We said sure. We brought them everybody together for a summer institute, and so they met during the summer institute. They revised the report card completely. We used a lot of Canadian models of what we
cool.
were doing. We didn't, I mean, relatively simple things, but drastically different. For example, we put the teachers' photographs on the report card.
Cute.
I mean, we stole that from Canada. The Canadians were doing this. When I asked them why they did it, they just, well, high school report cards are so impersonal. We're just not personalizing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with every class, instead of just a grade, you see the teacher's photograph, the teacher's name, and then the class grade. We pulled the non-achievement factors out. We reported homework separately, class participation separately. And we had a narrative that had two parts. And we got this from the Canadians too. There was a class part and a student part. So the
Cool.
teacher would enter like 2 or 3 sentences about what the class worked on during the marking period. But the great thing, teacher only had to do it one time. Every kid gets those sentences.
Mm-hmm.
Then the teacher can add a sentence about the kid. When the teachers had finished their development work and went back to their schools, they basically worked with their colleagues to help them understand the nature of their work. We didn't spend a lot of time worrying parents. We basically told the parents that we were going to, make some changes and we were going to survey them to find out their response to it. So here's what we did. For the first 2 marking periods of the coming school year, we sent them 2 report cards. We sent them traditional one parents were accustomed to getting, single grade for subject area, and we sent them our new one.
Cool.
Our new one had the teacher photographs. Our new one broke out these things, reported them separately, had the extended narrative. 2 marking periods, parents saw both. After the second marking period, we surveyed all the parents. And we said, look, we don't have the resources to keep sending you 2 anymore. We're going to send you only 1.
Which do you prefer?
You get to pick. Whichever one you want, we will send you. 100% of our parents chose a new one. We have amazing parent support, all right? Because we changed their experience. We showed them this is better, right? And so I see now in the state of Iowa, there's a bill proposed to outlaw standards-based grading at the secondary level in all Iowa schools, right? I say, if you understood the change process, you would have done this differently, right?
Mm.
We have not seen any of that here because parents are our allies. We understood what they needed and what they wanted. We shared with them. We asked for their perspective on it. And you know what? What's truly amazing? When we did this survey, we asked parents what they liked best about the report card. You know what came out as number one? The teacher photographs. It wasn't even our idea. All right, we stole that from what the Canadians were doing. They love the teacher photographs. They talked about how they feel they know the teachers, and it makes it much more personal to it. Now, interestingly, we have had this one dilemma. When we started this, we asked the teachers to be smiley in their photographs. We thought that was a good idea. But here's the problem. If a teacher assigns a low grade, should they really be smiling about it? So now we're thinking maybe we need two photographs. We need a frowning one and a smiling one. We'll order depending on the grade. And, my friend tells me that's easy to do. But see, but that's an easy thing to deal with. The major issue is we have parent support. Because we were sensitive to the change process, we changed their experience. We didn't worry about getting their attitudes and beliefs to change. We just showed them what we were doing. They saw that it was better, and they supported us in this effort.
Love it. Let the evidence-based practice speak for itself.
Exactly.
So cool. Well, Tom, you're just one of my favorite people to talk to. I think you bring such a well-rounded perspective that's so evidence-driven and history-driven and practical. And it's just such a delight to talk to you. I'm so thankful for you for coming on.
Cindy, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. You always press me to think about things more deeply, and I really do appreciate that.
Oh, thanks, Tom.